This lecture is for Chapter 1.6, the design of experiments. So we start, Chapter 1.6 has a lot more terminology, and really we're not going to really test on this section, but you need to be familiar with the terms in there. And so Chapter 1.6 outlines the design of experiments and some other ones, but we just want to look at the kind of the basic idea of experiments. And the first thing to think about is, what is an experiment again? It's a controlled study conducted to determine the effect of varying one or explanatory variables or factors has on a response variable. So we do something to an explanatory variable because we have a hypothesis that it's going to affect something else. And so we conduct an experiment. Any combination of these values of the factors is called treatment. When you do something, you treat someone with a medication or different medications. Another idea within that is the experimental unit is a person. So what are you doing the experiment on, or what object or what item are you doing the experiment on? That's called an experimental unit, or the subject. A control group. Many times when you conduct the experiment, you have two groups. The control group, the one that gets the treatment, that you try to affect them in some way, they get a medication, and then you have a group that doesn't get the medication. Or in some case, sometimes you give a group of placebo. It's an innocuous medication, something that does have no effect, and you see if still the patients get better. That's called an experiment, a placebo. And so from your note sheets, looking at your note sheets here, you can fill in those words: experiment, treatment, experimental unit, control group, and placebo. You can get those in there. The next thing, and again, the last thing for this section that we look at, is really just what are the steps in designing an experiment. There are 5 steps. They're all outlined here. And again, I just want you familiar with them because we talk about these ideas so much in the class or in your problems. And so we're not going to be able to conduct experiments in class, but you want to be familiar since so many problems involve that. And so what we're looking at here are to design an experiment means to describe the overall plan, right? You're going to design an experiment, and here are the steps. 1, identify the problem to be solved. Number 2, determine the factors that affect the response variable. Number 3, determine the number of experimental units. How many people are you going to be involved in the experiment? And there's many limitations to that. Step 4, determine the level of the predictor variables. Again, meaning that the predictor variables are your explanatory variables, right? And what levels are you going to, so that you can control for them, and so that you want to figure out how they're going to affect the response variables. And then step 5, we're still in that. And step 5 is to conduct the experiment. And so you have this idea of you actually go ahead and do it, but that's again after you've done the other series of steps. And so as I outlined on the steps in design experiment, we're not going to be able to do it again. I want you to get this down, but I want you to be familiar with these terms because they get used so often in the class. And you go ahead and get those down from the PowerPoint or here. You can read my writing, of course. And that's Chapter 1.6. There's more in the book you can read, but again, I just boiled it down to kind of the steps in designing an experiment. Since we don't really get to conduct that, you'll do that in your future lives.